It actually gave me a lot more hope that I could take control of my symptoms rather than just trying to find the perfect diet or going from doctor to doctor with no answers. Hi, I'm Iris Higgins. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I've also been doing a brain retraining program for the past 7 months to heal multiple food sensitivities and some chronic health issues. The program I've been doing is called the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, or DNRS, and I'm going to be going through a lot of different points about it. I want to tell you all about the program and how it's worked for me, so feel free to use the timestamps below if you're only interested in specific questions. Now, like I said, I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I've been in private practice for 10 years now. So I'm going to share my thoughts both as an individual doing this program and also as a hypnotherapist who has worked with clients with chronic illness for years. So let's start with a very brief primer on what DNRS is. According to the website, DNRS is a drug-free, self-directed program that uses the principles of neuroplasticity to help reverse limbic system impairment in the brain and to regulate a maladapted stress response involved with many chronic illnesses, such as long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, fibromyalgia, chronic Lyme disease, food sensitivities, anxiety, chronic pain, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and many other symptoms. That's a mouthful, right? If you've already been researching DNRS and other brain retraining programs, then you know what it's about. If you haven't been, then your mind might have just gone blank then because that was very wordy and jargon-filled. So I'm going to try to explain it in the best way I can. Feel free to chime in below if you also know about the program and feel like you can explain it better. So anytime you go through a stressful event, which could even happen in the womb as your brain is developing, your limbic system goes into a state of fight or flight. And your limbic system is a part of the brain that's involved in processing emotions and memories. It includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. Now, we've all heard of the fight or flight response. Your amygdala, which is a part of your brain that's involved in processing strong emotions, starts overfiring when it detects a threat, which sets off a cascade of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine, which prepare your body to go into a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And fawn is a people-pleasing response to avoid conflict. And typically we hear the example of a saber-toothed tiger. In the past, earlier human you would have been chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Your amygdala would detect a threat and your body would go into fight or flight. And all of these cascading hormones would help you to run as fast as you could to get away from the tiger. Then once the event was over, those stress hormones would calm down and your brain and your body would go back to homeostasis or baseline. Now, the idea with brain retraining and DNRS is that some stressful event in your life basically caused your brain to get stuck in fight or flight, like a light switch that doesn't turn off. For example, people with PTSD or social anxiety disorder or panic disorder may all show greater amygdala activation or a stronger fight or flight response. Annie Hopper, the creator of DNRS, often refers to this as limbic system impairment in the brain and says that you literally have a brain injury. In the DNRS examples, some common causes of limbic system impairment are COVID, which is when you see long COVID, Lyme disease, or toxic mold exposure, but those are just a few examples. Any stressful event, emotional or physical, could cause this impairment, especially in already highly sensitive individuals. So when I was watching the tutorials, Annie Hopper was very clear to say over and over that this is not in your head, that your physical symptoms are all real, and that at the root is a brain injury that is causing an overload of stress hormones throughout your body, making it difficult for your body to heal. And the idea here is that people with many chronic conditions that don't seem to respond to treatments may have a limbic system impairment in the brain that is at the root of all of these issues. And in this day and age, even without a limbic system impairment, most people are still being triggered constantly because we don't have saber-toothed tigers, but we do have freeways and giant buses that drive by you while you're walking, which scared me the other day, and cell phones that ping all day long, and so much more. Modern day living basically just keeps your limbic system on overload. Now, one of the biggest concerns I see with people considering DNRS or any form of brain retraining program is the idea that they're being told that their illness is in their heads. And when I first learned about the program, I heard about it from a client who was both interested and wary because she was tired of people telling her that exact thing. So I actually just dismissed the idea at first without even looking into it. And I have to be honest that as a hypnotherapist, I've read of the hypnosis profession similarly being harmful or dismissive of those with chronic illness. And I've always tried to be very aware and respectful of my clients' experiences because they know more about their illnesses and their lived experience than I do. And I know that the chronic illness community is often not taken seriously. And I think women and girls with chronic illness are especially looked down upon as being traumatic or that their illness is psychosomatic. There was actually a study published in the Journal of Pain in 2021 where it was found that women were perceived as having less pain than men and were more often prescribed psychotherapy for their pain, while men were more often prescribed pain medication. And obviously this gender bias might lead to disparities in how men and women are treated in medical care and in women being able to receive effective pain management. And as a personal note, I also wonder if it leads to disparities in how often men receive psychotherapy in conjunction with pain medication. And that seems to me to be an issue as well. While the study highlighted that women are less likely to get the medical treatment that they need, I think it also points out a societal issue where it is more accepted for women to use various forms of psychotherapy in conjunction with physical issues, while men are less likely to be encouraged to go down that route when psychotherapy may also be helpful for them. But that's an aside. My main point here is that the chronic illness community is not often taken seriously, especially girls and women, and even more so women of color, especially Black women, and the queer community as well. Numerous studies have shown that racial bias in healthcare works against Black people and other people of color. For instance, there was a 2019 study that showed that Black people were 40% less likely to receive pain medication than white patients, and Hispanic patients were 25% less likely to receive pain medication than white patients. And while I haven't found any studies on LGBTQ individuals and pain perception, there are plenty of articles and studies showing that this community is less engaged with their doctors because of discrimination and lack of knowledge of their issues within the healthcare community. So if just a few studies already show us that women, Black people, and Hispanic people are less likely to receive pain medication, and we know that the LGBTQ community is less likely to even go to the doctor because of harmful experiences, then what does that tell us? That cisgender, heterosexual white men are the only ones being taken seriously when they say they're in pain. That's not surprising, but it's obviously a problem. Personally, I have mistrusted Western medicine since I was a teenager and went to a doctor for stomach pain, and he told me I was just exaggerating, and he sent me back home. And in my private practice, I've heard many stories over the years that go along with these studies. I had a Black female client talk to me about looking for a doctor and how she was trying to find a woman of color, which was harder to find because of her previous experiences with white and male doctors. And I have another client who has experienced a lot of prejudice against her from doctors because of her weight, so she has to worry about not being taken seriously, even though her weight gain has been because of her illness and the medications she's had to take, not the other way around. But she still has to deal with assumptions that her weight is the cause of her problems and that if she just exercised and ate healthier, she would be fine. So all of this is to say that I understand that as a person with any sort of chronic illness, be it mental, physical, or both, the idea of a program that aims to retrain the brain and heal your physical symptoms through affirmations and visualization, and basically the same tools as hypnosis and manifesting practices, is a little bit suspect. So I want to be very clear that I get all of the reasons why this type of program may make people wary, especially if they've been told that their illness is in their head, that it's somehow their fault, or that they're just not trying hard enough to get better, and they just need to eat healthier and exercise more. This is actually the reason why it's taken me a while to do a review on it. I wanted to have enough time to really see what kind of results I was getting so I could share honestly. And I wanted to make sure that my review is really respectful of everyone dealing with chronic illness, and it doesn't seem like I'm just throwing a toxic positivity program at them. So that's my disclaimer, or I don't know what that is. Maybe it's not a disclaimer. But anyway, let's get into the review. First question, are brain retraining programs and DNRS saying that your illness is in your head? I think I already answered this, but I'm going to reiterate that an overactive amygdala could mean your brain is in constant threat detection mode and essentially sees threats everywhere, which keeps your stress hormones firing constantly, which causes a number of very real symptoms. Now, there could be other physical issues that need to be addressed by a medical professional, of course, but if those stress hormones are constantly cascading through your body, it's going to be very hard for any sort of treatment to be effective until you get the overactive stress response to normalize. And this made perfect sense to me when I was looking into the program. The idea that a part of my brain had been protecting me my whole life and overfiring, creating all of these symptoms, it just clicked with me. And it didn't to me mean that it was all in my head or that I was somehow responsible for any of this. It actually gave me a lot more hope that I could take control of my symptoms rather than just trying to find the perfect diet or going from doctor to doctor with no answers. Honestly, with my work as a hypnotherapist, it made more sense to me that a combination of generational trauma, triggering events, whether emotional or physical, plus societal imbalances, the stress of the always on modern living, and pressures to conform and perform in a culture of hustling and overworking could get anyone stuck in fight or flight, which could then lead to a number of debilitating physical symptoms. So if there's an issue in your brain that's keeping you from healing, then brain retraining and hypnosis are both tools that can help you to take the power back into your own hands. And honestly, that is why I loved the idea of DNRS so much, because it was a program that taught you tools you could use anytime to help yourself heal. And I saw so many people in Facebook groups saying that they had healed through this program and that they were not afraid of relapses because they had the tools to heal again if a relapse did occur. So why did I choose DNRS over other brain retraining programs? Simply put, when I was researching this program, I kept seeing two programs over and over, the Gupta program and DNRS. And I now know that there are many other programs as well, but these seem to be the most well-known. And what I saw most in the Facebook groups I was in was people saying that they had tried Gupta and DNRS and that DNRS worked for them when Gupta didn't. Now, I also saw lots of people who had success with the Gupta program, so I'm not knocking it at all, and I've never tried it. But overall, it seemed that DNRS was more effective based on my very basic Facebook group research. Now, the overall difference I heard between the Gupta program and DNRS was that DNRS was somewhat stricter and the Gupta program was a bit looser. Because I'm a perfectionist and a rule follower, I loved the idea of a program that told me exactly what to do. I didn't want a program that would give me options. I wanted clear-cut instructions that told me exactly what to do, and DNRS is definitely that. That being said, I have heard people say that DNRS, for that very reason, may not be the best program for perfectionists. For me, I disagree, and I think it's been wonderful for my perfectionism. It's like helping me to get over that. But I can also see how trying to do the program perfectly could be activating your amygdala's threat response. So if you are a perfectionist, you might want to look into a number of different programs and see which one intuitively feels right for you. Let's talk about my symptoms because everyone always wants to know this. And if you're doing a brain retraining program, it's discouraged to listen to people talk about their symptoms because it can activate those pathways in your brain. So feel free to check the timestamp below and click ahead to the next part if you don't want to hear about this. At one point, I went to the doctor armed with a list of over 25 different symptoms that ranged from food sensitivities to hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating, to pelvic pain, to depression, anxiety, chronic sore throat, reflux, a racing heart, insomnia. This is clearly not everything on the list, but again, I don't find it that helpful for me to go into detail, and I don't think it's that helpful for you either. But at the beginning of the pandemic, I decided to try the autoimmune paleo diet, or the AIP as it's known, because I was already gluten, dairy, soy, nightshade, bean, and refined sugar-free at that time. I think that's it. There might have been other things as well. And since we weren't socializing with anyone, I thought this was the perfect time to try the diet out and see if it helped with any of these issues. And I also had a lot of muscle pain. I was very tired every day by about 1 p.m. And I felt like I just didn't look like myself when I looked in the mirror. So what happened when I tried the AIP diet was that a lot of things improved immediately, which told me what I already knew, that my body was reacting negatively to a lot of foods. My hyperhidrosis went away, and this was the first time since high school that had ever happened. The reflux calmed down, my face and my skin looked amazing. But I started peeing constantly, an issue I'd had years ago when I briefly tried a paleo diet. And I wasn't eating low carb. I was deliberately getting lots of carbs in, but I was still peeing all the time and constantly dehydrated. But after even just a week of being on the AIP diet, if I ate anything that was off it at all, my body would respond so strongly that my heart would start to race. I couldn't sleep at all. I would lie awake all night long. Anytime I would fall asleep, I would instantly wake up with a racing heart. I had sharp pains in my pelvis, uterine fibroids that became inflamed. It hurt to sit down. It felt like my whole body was in freak out mode all the time. So when I followed the AIP diet, it was very limiting, having to eat separate foods from my family. And there was, a peeing problem. So I ended up feeling backed into a corner where I couldn't stick with the AIP diet, but I also couldn't get off of it. And all the foods that I had been sensitive to, but at least tolerating, my body was no longer even tolerating. So I was a wreck. I was convinced I was only going to get worse, and I just didn't know how to handle it. And neither did my doctor, to be honest. She believed me. I went to a functional nurse practitioner, and she believed me, but didn't know what to do. At the same time that I was dealing with this, my kids, who were 7 and 3, I think, also had multiple food sensitivities and a very limited diet, which was extremely exhausting for me because I was making all of their food from scratch. They both had various night pains that kept them and their dad and me up at night, not to mention all the doctors and appointments and specialists we took them to over the years trying to figure out what was going on. And when my symptoms were at their worst, I wasn't sleeping at all, and I just felt like my body was falling apart. And I read a book that a friend recommended called The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. And that book was a piece of the puzzle to me. I knew reading it that I had somehow boxed myself into a corner in my life, making my life progressively smaller and smaller as I tried to keep myself safe. And I could see patterns in the way I was reacting to food and the way I related to people, because I also had social anxiety. And in my work as a hypnotherapist, I like to look for patterns when people come to me with a problem so they can see if the situation is an isolated issue or if this is a pattern in their life that requires a deeper healing. And The Untethered Soul resonated with me, and I knew as I was reading it that the food sensitivities were somehow a pattern that required a deep dive into my own spiritual and emotional and physical healing. That's when I started looking into brain retraining, even though I'd heard about it a while ago. Now, I started DNRS in conjunction with biofeedback. So I started DNRS, I believe, in July of 2021, but now it's December of 2022. God, time is crazy. And I'm only 8 months into the program. And that's because DNRS asks you to do the daily practice rounds for an hour a day, every day, for a minimum of 6 months. And when I started, I honestly didn't take it that seriously. I saw immediate results, but I thought that I could skate by just doing it a few times a week. But even that I didn't stick with. But at the same time that I started DNRS, my kids and I were driving 2 hours each week and sometimes daily to do biofeedback for our food sensitivities. And while I've always been the type of person to try just one thing at a time so that I could fully ascertain if it was working, I knew I was in a really bad place, and if biofeedback and DNRS could help, I was going to do them both at the same time. So I'll link to the place that we went. It's called Advanced Allergy Phoenix. It's run by a naturopath named Dr. April Mays and her husband Michael, and they're wonderful and kind and really good with kids, and I highly recommend them. The biofeedback, which essentially was a form of brain retraining using a biofeedback machine, a cold laser, and acupressure points, teaches your brain that certain triggers are safe, and it was quick, it was painless, it was easy. After 6 months of treatment, my older daughter can now eat anything she wants, including gluten, dairy, sugar, nightshades, which she used to have a really bad reaction to. My younger daughter is still gluten-free, but she eats so much more than she used to, and she no longer complains of daily stomach aches. And what surprised and fascinated me the most was that the treatment that made the biggest difference for me personally was one that focused not on foods, but on the smells of things. After that treatment, I slept through the night for the first time in a very long time, and I stopped feeling tired, like just overnight. So I'm telling you all this partly because I want you to know that there are a lot of ways to approach brain retraining, And it might be worth looking into this place in Phoenix, and some people do come from across the country to do their treatments. We're looking for a similar therapy near you. But also because I want you to know that all of my results haven't been strictly from DNRS. The biofeedback sessions got me back from sort of the crisis situation I was in after doing AIP, back to my baseline, which still wasn't great, but I was no longer in that crisis mode. And it also got my kids to sleep through the night on a regular basis for the first time. And we'd been dealing with this for like 6 years, 7 years at that point. So I had some major anxiety about nighttime and sleep that eventually subsided once I realized that my kids weren't going to wake up in pain every night. What I also found interesting about the biofeedback was that it worked immediately. And with DNRS, you do incremental training with your trigger foods to slowly reintroduce them, which means you start with a small amount and slowly increase it. But when my kids did the biofeedback, they went from being not able to eat certain foods without having an extreme reaction to being able to eat as much of it as they wanted with no problem. There was no need for a slow introduction with biofeedback, so if that's something you can afford to do, I highly recommend it. But here's what happened for me. My kids' biofeedback treatments seem to have held. It's been a while since their last treatment and they're still doing great. But for me, I noticed that I felt like I was sliding backwards, like the progress I was making wasn't holding. And we had stopped doing the biofeedback because we couldn't keep paying for it. And I actually think they're reasonably priced, but you have to do so many sessions and it gets expensive over time. And I was also super tired of driving 2 hours there and 2 hours back. So we stopped, although I'll probably go back to them for tune-ups for my kids and I over the years because we really saw amazing results. But for me, I knew that there was something going on with my brain and anxiety that was keeping me in such a sensitive state that if I didn't deal with it, I would end up losing all of the positive benefits I had just spent a lot of time and money treating with biofeedback. So I went back to DNRS in May of 2022, which was almost a year after I first got the program, and I decided to commit to it fully. I decided that no matter what, I would do my hour of daily practice every day and go all in. So I have. There are a few days every month that I don't get the practice in, but like 95% of the time I'm doing my hour a day. So I think that's good. So I'm into my 8th month and these are the results I've seen. And this is the most fun part of the video, right? I love going to the DNRS forum and seeing what kinds of unexpected results people have seen. And I've seen so many interesting things like moles disappearing, eyesight improving, marriages being saved by one partner doing DNRS. And I've been keeping a journal of my progress so that I could look back on days when I needed to be reminded that this was working. Because not every day is perfect, right? You have days where you're like, meh, nothing's working today. And then I read the thing and I'm like, no, actually, like I've made a lot of progress. So the first thing I noticed within a couple of days of starting was that my chronic muscle aches went away. But I also started the biofeedback at the same time. So that made a huge difference as well. This was when I first started DNRS in the very beginning. But the second thing, once I really committed to it, and something I didn't really think about was my anxiety and my relationship with my kids improved immensely. And I'd always been someone who wanted kids. That was the number one thing I wanted in life above all else was to have kids. And then when I did have them, I felt like I was constantly almost drowning, like just popping up, getting a breath, and then getting pushed back down. I wasn't getting any sleep. My kids weren't getting any sleep. I think I had a case of undiagnosed postpartum anxiety, and I never talked to a doctor about it. And I'm not sure it fully went away until I started DNRS. But I remember that first week making a batch of cookies with my then 3-year-old, the first week of doing DNRS. And if you've ever baked with a 3-year-old and you have anxiety, you might understand that watching her spill everything made me feel so on edge, like I was just going to freak out, especially with the expensive gluten-free flours we were using. But after just a week of doing DNRS practice, I made some cookies with her, and that anxious feeling in my chest wasn't there. And I could stand back and let her make mistakes and just relax about it. And it wasn't like I was managing the anxiety. The anxiety just wasn't there. And that right there was all the motivation I needed to keep going. I realized very quickly that I may have decided to do this program because of food sensitivities, but it became clear to me that it was going to change so much more in my life than just food, which of course makes sense because how you do one thing is how you do everything. In the first couple of months, what I noticed the most was that my anxiety was lessening a lot in various areas. Like I would go to the grocery store and have a conversation with someone, a stranger, um, and feel really calm. Whereas before, a simple conversation with a stranger might make me blush really bad. And there was this curious observer thing that was very cool to witness. I kept being in situations and kind of stepping outside of myself like a curious observer and just thinking, oh, this would have really triggered me in the past, but I feel fine. And I was a much calmer parent. I started eating out at restaurants again with manageable symptoms. I was still eating gluten-free, but in the past I hadn't even been able to eat out at restaurants because there were just too many ingredients to deal with. But now I could go out to eat on occasion, and I might not feel great after, but it was manageable. I've also noticed I'm much more able to handle criticism, and I'm also doing a better job of setting healthy boundaries with my kids, which has always been hard for me. So I'd say in the first 4 months, what I noticed was mostly emotional progress with significantly less anxiety. Around month 5, though, I did notice some really cool physical changes. I had a C-section, what was now 4 years ago, and it never felt like it healed properly. It was always itchy, especially if I did any ab workouts, and if I massaged it, it felt like really tender. But one day I did an ab workout, and the next day I realized that there was no itching and that the tenderness was gone. And since then, the only times the itching or tenderness comes back is after I've eaten something I'm super sensitive to. But most of the time, my C-section finally feels healed, which I didn't really think was going to happen. I've also noticed that my nighttime reflux seems to have improved. And just in general, it's been easier for me to fall asleep. And I've seen multiple people in the forums say that they no longer wake up to go to the bathroom so much at night. And I'm really hoping to get to that place. In the 6th month, I realized that my eyesight had improved and I no longer needed to wear my glasses as often. Unfortunately, I had a really bad reaction to who knows what, and the next morning my eyesight had gone back to normal, meaning I needed my glasses all the time. But, that was a bummer, but I also recognize that if it can improve once, then it can do it again. So that's one of my goals now, is to be able to wear my glasses less because I get really tired of them. And my sleeping had already improved with the biofeedback, but it's gotten even better with DNRS, in large part because I use the rounds when I get into bed at night and they put me to sleep within a few minutes. As soon as I start saying the words, my body recognizes that it can calm down and I just fall asleep. So that's been awesome. In this 7th month, I noticed that I'm not getting sore throats as often as I used to from eating different foods. I don't get itchy at night the way I used to, again, after eating trigger foods. And just in general, I've been able to add in more foods and tolerate them better. I wouldn't say I am tolerating them perfectly or that I'm not sensitive to them anymore, but the reaction has gone down. So did DNRS get rid of my food sensitivities? Well, at this point, 8 months in, no. I've seen some improvement in my food sensitivities. Reactions are going down. Sugar, which I was not able to tolerate at all, like cane sugar, I can now actually tolerate a little bit. And I'm just eating a lot more foods than I used to. But one of the main practices in DNRS is to do daily incremental training with your triggers, which for me are foods, which is a form of exposure therapy. And I tried doing that twice and I found that I just didn't feel good either time, so I stopped. And I also noticed that the way that I was going about doing it was very strict and writing down the exact amount of food each day and really monitoring. So this is where my perfectionism and DNRS were not working that well together. So it felt to me like it was just activating my fight or flight response and my old ways of monitoring my food from days when I used to diet and days when I was obsessively trying to figure out which foods were causing problems. So I gave it a break and, just decided to do the rounds and focus on that. More recently, I've started training with foods again, but I decided to take a slightly different approach that felt less stressful for me. I think it's working, but it's sometimes hard for me to tell because I feel like I'm always reacting to something. So I'll have to update you again down the line and see where we're at. I do think of stress like we all have a bucket and we can handle a certain amount of stress. It's like that old game, don't spill the beans. Your stress bucket can handle a certain amount, but if it gets one bean over, it tips over. And I feel like my body has been under a lot of stress for a long time. And what I'm seeing is that the longer I do DNRS, the more it feels like little beans of stress are being taken out of my stress bucket. And it does feel like the focus right now is more on emotional issues. But I think that's where most of it has originated from me anyway. And so over time, I think reducing the emotional stress will lead to enough of a reduction in overall stress that I'll be able to regain a lot of foods back into my diet. But we'll see. So how is DNRS different from hypnosis or hypnotherapy? And hypnosis and hypnotherapy, by the way, are the same thing, just different words. This is an interesting topic for me because not all people who do DNRS would agree that it's basically self-hypnosis, but essentially DNRS and hypnosis are both about changing your story, changing the beliefs that are getting in your way, though DNRS talks more specifically about rewiring your neural pathways, but hypnosis is basically the same idea. I was really fascinated by the rounds, which is what they're called when you're doing the daily practice, because the rounds include different steps, and each of those steps also corresponds to a technique in hypnosis. So if you go through an hour of DNRS rounds, you're basically doing 4 15-minute mini self-hypnosis sessions. And I remember doing daily self-hypnosis before my second daughter was born, and I was experiencing a lot of positive shifts very quickly, just like in DNRS. But then I had a newborn and I stopped doing it, and I didn't have time or make the time to do that. But if you ask me, I actually think DNRS is simply a form of self-hypnosis, and you don't need to do this particular program in order to heal. You can find any program that works for you. What I do think makes such a big difference is learning the science of neuroplasticity and doing it daily. I think that's really important for truly rewiring new pathways in your brain. And what is both annoying about DNRS and also really effective is that they ask you to do an hour a day. I know not all programs do this, and some people think it's crazy, but it works for me. Now, there are 2 things about DNRS that I love. One is that you don't have to be in a meditative state to do it. When I do hypnosis with my clients, I use guided meditation to take them into a more relaxed meditative state. But when I'm doing my DNRS rounds, I don't need to go into that relaxed state. And that personally makes it easier for me to get going. And 2, I love that it's a DIY practice. I love that you pay one time and then you learn the tools that you can use whenever you need them. Because as anyone with chronic illness knows, we have all spent so much money on so many different things trying to heal. So if you can find one program that costs at this point $350 and you pay one time and that's it, that to me is worth it. That being said, there are some reasons why I think it would be helpful, and I'm just saying this as a hypnotherapist. There are some reasons why I think it would be helpful to see a hypnotherapist instead of doing a brain retraining program, or why I think it would be helpful to work with a hypnotherapist in conjunction with a brain retraining program. So I have one client who tried the Gupta program, and she's seen some benefit from it, but she also has such intense brain fog and gets so little sleep that it's hard for her to focus on the program and do it all by herself. So she does weekly sessions with me over the phone because she needs that support at this time in her healing journey to help her kind of get through the fog. And DNRS also has a very strong focus on staying positive. And this is where I think some people feel like it veers into toxic positivity. But what I have found is that there needs to be a balance here. You need some awareness of what are your patterns or habits that are sabotaging you. And for many people doing brain retraining, there are patterns of focusing only on the negative or only seeing what was wrong in their lives or spiraling into depression and anxiety. And this is definitely something I've seen in myself, and DNRS has helped me immensely to see when something is a pattern and to choose not to go down that path and to very stubbornly and persistently focus on the positive so that my brain will create new pathways. But there's also a difference between changing a negative pattern and denying your own feelings. And what I've found for some of my clients is that there is actually a history for them of being told that their feelings don't matter or that they aren't valid. And so there's a history of them mistrusting themselves. And so there are times when DNRS might encourage you to ignore whatever is coming up and continue to focus on your positive brain retraining rounds. But I know that when clients have old issues coming to the surface that need to be seen and acknowledged, ignoring them doesn't work. That, in fact, the suppressing of those feelings may be the very pattern that needs to be interrupted. So what I can do in a session is recognize when that is happening and give my client space to be with those feelings, to hold their inner child and validate them and teach them how to work through those feelings so that they can be moved through and out of their bodies. And only then can we get back to focusing on the positive changes and goals. A personal example is when I first started doing DNRS really seriously, what came up a lot for me was grief. And one of my grandfathers had died of a heart attack when I was in my second month of my first year of college. And so I never, fully processed that because I had just had to dive back into school. And then two of my grandmothers passed away during the pandemic when it also felt like there was a very little way to process it. And so when I started doing DNRS, I would just find myself sobbing and really letting all of that grief out. And I knew intuitively, and as a hypnotherapist, that these were just emotions that had gotten stuck in my body, and that this allowing of the grief was good, and that I could stay with it for as long as I needed to. But my rounds weren't all about crying and sadness. Allowing myself that space to grieve also made room for lots of positive emotions afterwards. And even that process of making space for grief and then going into a positive visualization was teaching my brain that it's okay to feel grief and let it out. And eventually, as I knew it would, my rounds stopped being about grief because I fully processed it and I let it out. Another example is I worked with one client, an amazing young Black woman, and she was feeling a lot of tension in her body. And what she realized in one of our sessions was that the tension was repressed anger, not just from the racism that she's dealt with personally, but also from generations of trauma in her family from racism and colonialism and slavery. And she needed that space in order to realize that the anger was there and that it was okay for her to make space to be with it. And so I actually created an MP3 recording for her, a guided meditation for healing generational trauma, so that she could also do some of that work on her own after our session. Because sometimes you also just need to be alone and really cry and feel everything without somebody else there. And so with her permission, I shared that meditation here on YouTube, and I'll link to that below. And I created it so that anyone can use it, regardless of gender or race, and it's for all forms of generational healing. But those are things that can be done in a hypnosis session that maybe might come up when you're doing your brain retraining, but you might not know what to do with that stuff when it comes up. And I'm pretty sure I've seen Annie Hopper, the creator of DNRS, say in the training videos that there are times in DNRS when stuff comes up that you should see a therapist for. So DNRS is not necessarily something that replaces therapy, but that can be used in conjunction with it if you find the right type of therapy for you to do during DNRS. So basically, I think DNRS is very similar to self-hypnosis, but without the added benefit of having a hypnotherapist there who can guide you if difficult emotions come up that need to be worked through, but with the added benefit of being a one-time fee that costs less than ongoing hypnosis or the biofeedback treatments I did. And I also think that the DNRS program does a great job of explaining neuroplasticity and the science behind how we can change our brains. So if you're someone who likes to focus on the science, this is a good program for that. So how long does it take? The DNRS program asks you to do the daily rounds for 6 months. But after 6 months, I feel like I'm only just beginning and like I have so much more healing to do. And I don't know how long I'll continue to do the daily rounds, but I have seen a lot of people in the forums who took a good 2 years to feel fully recovered. And just knowing that actually is very helpful for me. And I always remember what my hypnotherapy mentor would tell us, which is that your problems didn't start overnight. You know, it's been this lifetime of our brains learning to be a certain way, so our problems aren't going to go away overnight either. So, do you really need to do the rounds for an hour a day? Well, if you're doing this program, I think you do. I know there are other brain retraining programs that don't include this whole hour, but I have also found that it's an extremely healing practice. And I'm seeing such a difference in myself emotionally, physically, spiritually, that it is definitely worth that hour. And once I committed to it, I realized that even the busiest people I know can still find an hour a day, even if it's in 15-minute increments. And we'll spend an hour, daily working out or an hour daily watching TV or scrolling through social media. So why wouldn't we give our mental health an hour of our time each day too? And even when I'm done doing DNRS, I still think it would make sense to spend an hour daily on some sort of mental health activity, whether it's taking a walk in nature or meditating or doing yoga. And I think in our society, if we don't make time to calm the nervous system down, it won't happen. And if we look at everything going on in our world, I think we can see the effect that a lack of making space for mental health is having on us physically and on our environment and on the world as a whole. So, there's that saying, as within, so without. So I really think that anytime we're working on our own personal healing, it's going to have a ripple effect and hopefully help healing the world as well. Okay, so a really important question is, could DNRS make you worse? And When I was researching the program, I did go down a lot of Reddit holes, and I was specifically looking for people saying that the program was a scam or was bad because I wanted to know. And I didn't find much, but I did find a few people who said that their symptoms got worse doing the program, and so they quit and decided it was a bad program. But there are some very real reasons why their symptoms could have gotten worse, and not all of them are bad. So let's talk about that a little bit. DNRS asks you to do daily incremental training as part of your program, which I've talked about. And this is a technique used in cognitive behavioral therapy with fears to help train your brain to be less afraid of triggers. And like I said, I've only just started doing this in a modified way. And I think it's perfectly fine to focus on the rounds without the incremental training until you feel ready. But I think it's also easy to try incremental training and go too fast. So that's one thing that could happen to people, is that they just get impatient and they take it faster with testing their triggers than their brain is ready for. And I mean, that's okay. It's a learning process and it can take time to figure out how to make it work for you. But another thing that happens is that sometimes when you start healing, your brain kind of freaks out and it gets scared that you're suddenly doing things differently. And so your brain works harder to scare you and make you go back to what was comfortable. And I see people talking about this a lot in the forums, and how when they just stuck to the program and they kept doing the rounds, their symptoms eventually subsided. And there's a book called The Way Out, a revolutionary, scientifically proven approach to healing chronic pain by Alan Gordon, that talks about this very concept. It's called extinction bursts. And basically, your symptoms increasing is not always a bad thing. In some cases, it can actually be a sign that you're on the path to healing and you just need to stick with it, as long as I said above, you're not doing your incremental training at too fast a pace for your brain and your body. And one other thing I want to bring up is the emotional stress it could cause if you buy the program, give it your all, and you don't see improvements. And of course, this could happen with any treatment you try, and I don't think it's a reason not to try something. And of course, remember, the program says it takes a minimum of 6 months, but that does not mean you're going to be fully healed in 6 months. I'm 8 months in, and I have so much further to go. But I feel like even if you don't see an improvement in physical symptoms, the rounds do make you feel so much better emotionally that it's worth it for that alone. And I've seen at least one other review on YouTube where she said it didn't improve her food sensitivities, but that she felt a lot happier when she was doing the program. So for mental health alone, I think it's worth it. But again, being chronically ill means there is a lot of judgment placed upon people that it's in their heads or that they just need to try harder. And so if you're doing the program the best you can and you aren't seeing the results you want, that could set you up to feel like you are a failure, not that the program failed. And I think it's really important to go in with the idea that not every program is right for every person. And if it doesn't work for you, or if you find you can't stick to it, that doesn't mean you've failed. It might just mean it's not the right program for you, or that your particular health issues require a different approach, or maybe it's not the right time and you can try again later. Okay, so is DNRS worth the cost? I think I've answered this already, but I do want to say very clearly that yes, it is absolutely worth $350, which is what it currently costs. I have paid so much more for programs that I got so much less out of, and this is one of the things that I saw come up in forums a lot when I was researching the program. There seemed to be a lot of people complaining that Annie Hopper was charging for this information rather than giving it away for free. And you know, and I know how much other types of alternative treatments cost. Unfortunately, there are a lot of chronically ill people in our country going into major debt just to pay for their treatments. And $350 is such a small price for something that could potentially change your life. I'm not saying it's a small price. $350 might be a lot for you, but compared to a lot of other programs or treatments, it's comparatively less. And I've also listened to Annie Hopper on various podcasts, and I'm in the DNRS community forums, and I see how robust this program is. It's not just a course where you take it and then you're left to your own devices. There is so much extra support built into the program if you choose to access it. And many people out there would be charging way more for all of this. So I actually think it's a really low price for what you get. So would I recommend DNRS, and would I recommend it to my clients? Yes, I do recommend DNRS. I think that's kind of obvious at this point. I have absolutely seen huge changes in my life in the last 8 months, and they're internal. I don't think the people around me are necessarily seeing it because so much is happening on a gradual and emotional and even spiritual level. But I'm really excited to see where this goes. And yes, it would be wonderful to be 8 months in and no longer have any food sensitivities. And I've seen plenty of people in the forums and groups who have gotten over their food sensitivities much faster. But I really don't mind that it's 8 months in, and I feel like it's just the beginning. I feel like this is shifting things in my internal sense of being, and I'm excited to keep going. And I have clients that I think DNRS would be a great fit for, and I've recommended it to them. And that being said, it has to be the right fit for your personality. I've recommended the program to 4 of my friends and family who have tried it, and I don't think any of them have stuck with it, even though when they did, they saw results. But it might be that they'll come back to it later and commit to it like I did, or it might be it's just not the right program for them and they need to find something that resonates with them better. So like I said, I'm a perfectionist, or I used to be, and I'm trying not to be anymore. And I'm a rule follower, also learning to break the rules sometimes. And so I'm the ideal person for this type of program because once I commit to something, I usually go all in. And I was also in a really desperate space when I started the program, and I knew that nothing in my life was going to improve if I didn't make a big change in how I was showing up in it. So DNRS felt like the right program to help me change not just my physical health, but my life overall. And I also think that there are caveats to my recommendation. I do have one client who hasn't seen a lot of results from brain retraining, and I think it's brought up old feelings about not being good enough or not trying hard enough. So I think while she agrees with the science behind it, she's also found it to be a little bit triggering for her. So she has found it more helpful to work with me regularly because I can help her tease out what is self-sabotaging behavior and what is her needing to listen to herself and heal old wounds. And I have some clients that just aren't interested, and that's fine too. Like, everyone needs to listen to their own intuition around their health. One thing I would like to see is the DNRS community forum is this really awesome, super supportive place. And I read it when I'm needing encouragement or just feeling down. And one thing I love is that they have a special group for LGBTQ. And I wonder if it would also be beneficial for them to have a group for people of color. I've noticed that the majority of people in the DNRS forum look white. And I say look because I'm multiracial and white assumed. So most look white, and I haven't seen anything in their marketing that makes me think that they're going beyond the basics to try to appeal to a more diverse population. But I do think that people of color have experiences that are different from white people, and I could imagine that it might be difficult to express some of their particular issues while doing the program without feeling uncomfortable or possibly dismissed. So I think that that's something that the DNRS team could potentially add as a benefit to their members. And that could also attract more people of color to join the program and succeed so that they could hire some to be coaches. And right now on their website, all of their coaches appear to be white women and one white man. And that right there is something that could deter some people of color who will want a coach who understands their background. And this is, of course, an issue in the wellness community as a whole. But I think the DNRS team is in a good position to create change within their program to show their commitment to diversity and to helping all people to heal. Okay, so that's it for today. I have so much more to say, but I don't want this video to be any longer, so I'm going to do a second part. And part 2 is going to focus more on the nuances of what I'm learning and tips for you if you're already doing DNRS or another form of brain retraining, and you want some ideas on what has worked for me and how I tweak the program to my own personality. So if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe so that you'll get the notification when that video comes out. And if you're interested in working with me, whether you're doing a brain retraining program or not, you can learn more about that at irishiggins.com, and you can book a free consultation there. And all my work is over the phone, so I work with people anywhere. And links to everything I've referenced are down below. And if you feel like this video was helpful and you decide to try DNRS, the link below is an affiliate link, and I would be super grateful if you used my link to sign up. It doesn't change your price at all, but I get a small commission for sharing my experiences, which helps support all the free content I post on YouTube. And I signed up as an affiliate because I love the program so much, and my friends and family are probably all tired of hearing me talk about it. Now, I would love to hear below if you have tried DNRS or another brain retraining program and what your experience has been, or if you have any questions you want me to answer in a future video, just leave them below. All right, have a great day. See you next time.